Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. Another top 5 matchup for Ohio State as the Buckeyes host Indiana in chilly Columbus. Plus, the CFP bracket is out, and Boise State has a bye week. How will this sit with SEC and Big Ten fans? Is there SEC bias? We're going to talk about all of that and more in a loaded special edition of Saturday Cadence as we kick off our 100th episode. So welcome into the show. My name is Blake Biscardi with David Wertheim and Grant Kincaid alongside. We are proudly presented by the Silver Bulletin. David, 100 episodes in. Very exciting. It's been a great journey together. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into each show, helping us grow. We appreciate every single one of you. Big week ahead on the slate, though. Where's your mind at heading into Saturday?
Yeah, first of all, 100th episode is really exciting. So thank you guys for sticking with us. It's been a really fun show, obviously, the last couple of years, and we look forward to continuing that. So thank you to all you guys, and thank you to you guys, Blake and Grant. It's been really fun working with you, so I look forward to that continuing. And so as for my mindset, Blake, we've said it since episode 1, the games to remember are played in November, and we're in the thick of it here in November. A good slate for us this week, obviously headlined by Ohio State and Indiana. And, it's time to put the pedal to the metal and, for these teams to show us what they're really made of. So I'm excited. I'm sure the players and coaches out there are too, and should be a great couple of weeks.
Yeah, 100 episodes is definitely, interesting to look back on from when we started and where we started. And obviously we're going to keep going, and we really do it for the love of the game. This is something that we talk about every single day with each other. So, this isn't some orchestrated show. This is just us talking ball. So we love doing it. But yeah, it's a really exciting time, and the games on the slate the next few weeks are going to be just absolute cinema.
Yeah, I mean, just to recap a little bit of last week, just to remind people of those big games, we had Georgia beating Tennessee, puts them right back in the college football playoff race. Colorado continues to surge, Arizona State as well, 2 of the hottest teams in the country. So we look at these college football playoff rankings that come out, and you know how the bracket works. It goes to the 4 highest ranked conference champions. And the big misnomer was that is it's reserved for the Power 4 conferences. Well, Boise State is actually higher ranked than any Big 12 team. So Boise State, the group of 5 team, heads into that 4th bye week spot. David, when you look at the bracket and you see Boise State, the group of 5 team, having the bye week over a Power 4 conference, and I know this is hypothetical, but it's relevant to the playoff structure, especially going into the future. What do you make of that? And then how do you think that sits with a conference like the SEC or the Big Ten? The Big Ten having 4 of the top 5 teams, and the SEC having 5 teams in the top 11, yet only one of their schools is going to get a bye week.
Yeah, I think it's still early in this 12-team playoff system. There's going to be kinks that need to be worked out. There always is. There was with the 14 playoff. That's why we're at 12 in the first place. And so I think it's just a little too early to put some stock into that. I think there's also a decent chance that one of those Big 12 teams ends up leapfrogging Boise State by the end of the year, even if Boise State, stays with that 1 loss to Oregon. I could still see Big 12 2 losses and jumping ahead of them. So I would say it's still early. I could see why Big Ten and SEC fans would be frustrated with that. I think it's warranted. I don't think Boise State would be favored over any of those teams on the neutral field. We'll see in the college football playoff if they were to get the bye. So yeah, I mean it's early. I see the disagreement, I see the reservations the fans have, but it's early. I'll just say, let it play out. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of football to be played next couple of weeks.
Oh, there's no doubt. And Grant, let's look at a team like Texas. They are playing Texas A&M next week. All right, that game is a play-in game to the SEC championship, the way that conference is sitting. But what happens if Texas loses? Texas does not have a marquee win because Michigan's sitting at 500, likely going to beat Northwestern. So, okay, they're 6-5. But they lost to Georgia by 15 points at home, played a terrible game. If Texas gets a second loss, do you think they can actually drop out of the college football playoff when you're comparing all of these 2-loss teams in the SEC and their resumes? You look at a team like Georgia, multiple ranked wins. Alabama has 4 ranked wins. Ole Miss has just beaten Georgia. They're one of the hottest teams in the country. Tennessee has beaten Alabama. Texas is the only team that does not have that marquee win in conference. So when you're looking at that, then even Texas A&M would have that head-to-head over them. So what do you think the committee does with Texas should they lose?
Yeah, it is interesting because Oklahoma and Michigan, at the time, we thought were definitely marquee wins and wins that were going to propel them into getting a bye in the playoff. But if Texas loses to A&M, I don't see certainly how you put them high enough to where they could ever get a bye. But then when it comes to the playoff, and we've mentioned earlier, looking at how jam-packed the SEC is in that top 11, I don't know how you compare to the other resumes and say, well, Texas deserves to hop any of these teams, because like you said, Texas has lost. They would have lost the 2 games that would actually give people reason to believe that they're a championship contender. And there are some games where they've been more than suspect. So the talent is there, but the resume, I'm not sure it would be there.
I think it's fair to compare Texas to a team like Penn State. Now, I want to caveat that with I think Texas is a better football team than Penn State, and they have a higher ceiling than Penn State does. But looking at their schedule, there's not a big win on that schedule. It's just a quote unquote good loss. So that's how I would look at Texas if they would drop that game. But David, let's bring Indiana in this discussion. Just assuming that chalk holds and Ohio State wins this game, if you're sitting there debating a 2-loss Texas, a 1-loss Indiana, and a 2-loss Tennessee per se, which team can win that debate? How does Indiana's play this weekend factor into this college football playoff? Do they have to win to get in your opinion? Can they lose close and still get in, or do you think they're going to just fall out regardless of what the outcome is unless they win?
No, I'm in the lose close campaign. I think that if Indiana loses and they lose close, I think that they still have a warrant to be in the college football playoff. Just looking at precedent, right? I mean, this would be an 11-win Big Ten team, an 11-1 Big Ten team. Even in the 14 playoff, it was rare that one of those got left out. It did happen a couple of times. I remember Ohio State in 2018 being one of those examples, a couple others, 2016 Penn State team, et cetera. So now with a 12-team playoff, if you have one loss and you're in the Big Ten, you go 11-1. I mean, yeah, their strength of victory is not great. But at the same time, they're clearly better than all the teams they beat, right? They're clearly in the upper echelon of college football teams. And I think that would be enough to warrant the spot, even with a close loss.
I'm with you on that. I think that's what should happen too. I think Indiana should be in with one loss, unless they would get blown out by more than 3 touchdowns. I think Indiana has earned that spot. Grant, what are your sentiments on the Hoosiers?
Well, I just want to kind of add on to what David was saying, the fact that an 11-win Big Ten team is going to get into the playoff, especially if their only loss is decently close to Ohio State. I think the committee has obviously showed us what they value, and they value the SEC and the Big Ten because, as it stands, 8 of the teams are going to be from those 2 conferences. So I think you see Indiana there sitting at 5. Any team sitting at 5, if they sustained, a close loss to a top 2 team, they probably wouldn't drop completely out. So I think Indiana's it. I think, no, Dave is right.
Yeah, I think Indiana is ranked high enough. Now I'm kind of going to create a counter argument to this where I pretty much contradict myself, but hear me out on this one. I think Indiana's ranked high enough to where if they lose close, they don't fall out. Texas is where I was just saying I don't think that they get in if they lose. The reason being is because of all the head-to-head and tiebreakers and how close that cluster of SEC teams actually is. And when you compare those resumes together, when they're even with the 2 losses in the loss column, that's where I think it gets tricky for Texas. And then, like you and David were both saying, Grant, I think that's a saving grace for Indiana. is they would only have one loss. They would have won 11 games in the Big Ten, albeit against a very weak schedule, the weakest of the field. So I think that they can stay in. But David, I want your opinion on the 1 seed versus the 5 seed. We have talked about this from the summer that it looks like the 5 seed is actually the best position for a team to be in the playoff. And people were thinking, well, how could that be where you're passing up a bye week to be the 5 seed? Well, and this is no knock on these teams. As the bracket would stand right now, Oregon being number one, they would await the winner of the 8-9 game, which would be Notre Dame against Alabama. Boise State is the 4 seed. They would await the winner of 5 seed Ohio State and 12 seed BYU. So that means Ohio State could technically beat the Big 12 champion and then the group of 5 team or vice versa, and then get to a semifinal. So do you think it is better to be the 5 seed, play a first round game, getting the quote unquote lesser opponents, or would you rather have the bye week, get to a quarterfinal immediately on a neutral site, and then just go win those ball games?
Well, I think this year specifically, it would be better to be the 5. You line up with BYU or whoever ends up winning the Big 12. It may not be BYU. And then Boise State, or potentially, like you said, vice versa. So this year, yeah, that could be the case. That might not always be the case, though. If there's a dominant team that arises from this new Big 12, you know, anything could happen. I mean, we saw what TCU did a few years ago, knocking off Michigan in the semifinals. So, there will be a good Big 12 team once again. It'll happen. The SEC and the Big 10 certainly aren't going anywhere, and it looks like the ACC will have at least one good team every year. And as such, I think that most years it's probably better to be the 1. I think this is just a weird year where, it's probably not the best to be the 1. It's probably best to be the 5 this year specifically, but I don't see that happening. It's just too small of a sample size to really determine what you'd rather do in the long term. Although I do certainly agree that this year it would be better to be the 5.
I think where that argument could be tricky too, David, is if Colorado is the team that wins the Big 12. And I say that because the whole perception of this playoff bracket this year, like you're saying, is that the 5 seed is the place that you want to be and it has the easier road, which it does. But if a team like Colorado gets in there, I don't see a player on BYU, Boise State, it's Ashton Genty notwithstanding as a running back. But on both sides of the football, Colorado has playmakers that could play at Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, Texas, etc. They could play at these places, and maybe Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter just go off on whatever that defense is that they're playing in that first game, and they pull the upset. So I think mindset-wise, if it's Colorado, I think you have to be on high alert because that team can certainly have the horsepower to go win a game like that. Grant, do you think it changes things if Colorado is that team that's sitting there in the 12 seed or the 4 seed? Or are you with David where regardless, it's better to be the 5?
I do think Colorado is a little different, like you said. I think they have just enough talent, just enough playmakers in the right positions, like a Travis Hunter that can play multiple positions, and Shedeur Sanders, who is going to be an NFL quarterback prospect, a high level NFL quarterback prospect. So there is kind of that, that line where Colorado can sneak up on people more than they already have. And I think if Colorado runs the table here, the trajectory that it sends them on, not only in the Big 12, but nationally, because they're going to get that bid if they can win the conference. Colorado could be that next powerhouse in the Big 12. And I was not on the Dion or Colorado train for a while, but I think it's coming into fruition possibly.
Yeah, I'll chime in there and just add that, it'll be interesting to see what Dion does, right? I mean, he's kind of hinted that he'll leave when his sons leave. Obviously, that's going to happen after this year. Travis leaves after this year.
Yeah, no doubt.
So it'll be interesting to follow for sure. Maybe, Dion takes another job that comes available, whether in college or the pros. Who knows? Maybe he follows his son and ends up as an assistant where he goes. I mean, it's just, there's so many variables at play there. But for Colorado, yeah, I mean, that would scare me a little bit. Like Grant said, they have playmakers in the right places. So yeah, it would change things for me, but I think I'd still rather play them than the winner of that Alabama Notre Dame game. Those teams are looking pretty hot lately, especially Notre Dame, who's been whacking people ever since that embarrassing loss to Northern Illinois. So yeah, certainly would make things interesting. I think I'd still rather be the 5.
David, you bring up Notre Dame, and that was actually something I wanted to talk about. No one's discussing Notre Dame. They're just sitting there quiet as a mouse, smack dab in the middle of this top 10. Everyone has written them off since they lost to NIU. It's all SEC, Big Ten, all these other teams. No one's mentioning Notre Dame. Is this Notre Dame team capable of winning playoff games or just a game this year? Do you think this team is different than the ones in the past? How do you stack up this year's Irish team versus some of the other teams that have made the playoff?
I mean, you never really know with Notre Dame till you get there, just because they're not in the conference. Obviously, they play that hybrid ACC schedule now, and they've looked pretty good outside of that clunker against Northern Illinois. I mean, they went on the road week 1 and beat a Texas A&M team that's sitting there at 8-2 right now. They took care of Louisville at home, who's sitting there 6-4, but they were ranked up until their loss to Stanford last week. And then other than that, they've demolished everybody. They crushed Navy, who was ranked at the time. They crushed Florida State, Virginia last week. They beat Georgia Tech on the road easily. And then obviously took care of their other non-conference games with big wins, Purdue and Miami, Ohio. Crushed Stanford as well. So a couple more games. Again, we're talking about this. They'll play Army this week in another ranked matchup. And then they'll go to USC to close out the regular season. So still some answers that can be given from Notre Dame. But right now they've taken care of business since that embarrassing loss in week 2 for sure.
Yeah, I actually think that the committee, let's say Indiana loses here just because of the 5th ranked team. I actually think the committee may have an argument to jump Notre Dame over Penn State and make Notre Dame the 4th ranked team in the country if they can blow out Army this week, just as another ranked win. The way that they've been playing, because Notre Dame's resume again looks better than Penn State's. They have that win over Texas A&M from week 1 that continues to look better, and it will only get better if the Aggies can pull off that win over Texas. But before that, they've got a danger game against Auburn that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But Forever Game Day is a new partner. They believe in what we're doing around here. And as a return, we've got you guys a discount code. Use Silver for 15% off your first order at forevergameday.com to get your favorite team's humor-based apparel today. David, Grant, let's hop into the game of the week here. Top 5 matchup in Columbus. This is the 3rd one for the Buckeyes this season. Ohio State hosting Indiana. Big news out of the Woody last night, late. Seth McLaughlin, the center, tore his Achilles in practice and is done for the season. David, when you look at an injury like that, number one, how does it impact Ohio State? The team psyche, the offensive line has already been patchwork, albeit the best it's looked all season under this new group. But how does that play into the Indiana game with it happening midweek like that?
Yeah, absolutely brutal. Really, really tough. I mean, that's the 2 seniors. There's 3 seniors on the offensive line, and 2 of them now, Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin, have been knocked out by season-ending injuries. I did see something today on Twitter. Jeremy Birmingham reported that as he was coming off the field on Saturday, McLaughlin was telling people around him that his Achilles felt sore. And that's never good because when it goes, it goes. And I don't know that there's anything Ohio State could have done to prevent that. I saw a lot of people talking about the turf at the practice facility. But the Achilles is one of those that, when it's going to go, it's going to go. And it sounded like it was ready to go on Saturday. So I just feel so bad for McLaughlin, a guy who is a senior who had already accepted his invitation to play in the Senior Bowl next year, had really improved his draft stock after a rough year at Bama. So you just feel terrible for him. As for Ohio State, they have a couple options. They can keep the line as it is right now and just insert redshirt freshman Joshua Padilla at center. They could also move Carson Hinsman, who was last year's center, now playing left guard, over to center and insert Austin Sierreveld at left guard. Sierreveld has started a couple of games for the Buckeyes this year early in the season and has played significant snaps. So there's a couple options. Honestly, if there was a player to lose, it's better that it was an interior offensive lineman rather than another tackle. I'm not sure Ohio State could have stomached another tackle loss. They can stomach this. It'll make things difficult. The Indiana game has gotten harder as a result. I still think Ohio State will take care of business. there's ways you can hide a center in theory with RPOs and different things like that, mixing up the run and pass games, having some extra protection in there. So there's still things they can do, but it's certainly harder and a brutal loss. I will say for the morale piece, I think these guys are going to play hard. I think they're going to play hard for Seth. They're going to play hard for Josh Simmons. You don't want to see your two leaders go out like that. And I think that the rest of the guys will play hard for them. And also it's their opportunity. You win the next few games on your schedule and you're in Buckeye history in a good way. So it's a big opportunity for these guys who maybe didn't expect to be playing significant snaps late in the season, but they're going to be doing it. So, that's where we're at. And I think the Buckeyes will figure it out. They've done a good job of weathering the storm so far.
Yeah, it's David put it well there. It's it sucks because he had been playing so well. Snap issues just weren't even a thing this, as far as I saw, and if they were very minimal, and that was the whole story with him, and he was playing super well. Also it is, like Dave said, it's in a position that we can kind of afford to happen. It's obviously never ideal to lose a center. That is a very important position. But we had a little bit of depth there. But this does put Ohio State in a weird position because these are guys that are going to have to play a lot more snaps than they were used to. And inversely, because they have to do that, there's going to be guys filling in for them that haven't taken any meaningful snaps at all. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the shuffle works out. I think they'll figure it out. I'm not too worried. And Indiana, that game is still, the rest of the season, I feel like, at least until the Big Ten championship, possible Big Ten championship game, Ohio State can handle themselves.
I mean, it really depends on which direction they want to go. Do they want to stick with the most experienced lineup? That would mean moving Hinsman back to center and inserting Sierreveld at left guard. Or do they want to go with the continuity piece, keeping the other four guys in their same spots? Donovan Jackson and Hinsman have been working well together when they're next to each other. So you insert Padilla at center. So it'll be interesting to see which route they go with. Do they go with the strictly more reps route, or do they go with the continuity route? So it'll be a nice storyline to follow Saturday at about 12:08 when this thing kicks off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see because you can make a pros and cons list for either option, David, that you're mentioning. And I think it's interesting too with Ohio State this year in the preseason. We were talking about if there was a weak unit on this Buckeye team, what would it be? It was the offensive line. Not that it was bad, it just had the most question marks. And now Ohio State has had to play 3 top 5 games in each of those games now. The offensive line is at the forefront of those headlines where they have to now overcome adversity with that unit. Josh Simmons going down mid-game against Oregon, a makeshift patchwork O-line against Penn State that played very well, no penalties. Now you're going into Indiana. Their interior rush defense has been very talented. It's the top in the country. Now, a caveat on that is some of the teams that they have played in the Big Ten have not had really good rushing defenses. So maybe some of that comes out in the wash where, okay, maybe Ohio State's not as efficient in the couple opening series or in the first game with this new offensive line, however that looks, whatever direction Justin Fry, Chip Kelly, and Ryan Day decide they want to go. Or, what happens after that? They get to play in this game. Can they run the football? Do they scheme it? What does it look like? And then they make up for that because maybe Indiana's rush defense is not as good as advertised. That's something that we will keep an eye on, like you're saying, David. But look at the quarterback battle here. I think this is where Indiana sees the path to victory is they need this game to be a shootout. They need it on the shoulders of Curtis Rourke and make it a Rourke versus Will Howard type of battle. How do you see these two quarterbacks factoring into the game? Do you think this game has to be on Will Howard's shoulders for Ohio State the way that it does for Indiana? Because when you see these teams that are maybe not as talented with a high blue chip ratio like an Ohio State or a Georgia or an Alabama, a lot of these teams that are coming up or they're trying to pull an upset, normally they have about one really good receiver or a great tight end or something where they have to feature that guy. Indiana, though, they can pass it around with some of their wide receivers. It's by committee. They have a very, very talented group of wide receivers, top 4 in the Big Ten. So when you look at this quarterback battle, how do Will Howard and Curtis Rourke factor into this game in terms of the outcome?
Well, they just can't make mistakes. Whoever makes more mistakes, their team's probably going to lose. Can't turn the ball over. Will Howard has had a couple of really, really bad interceptions this year. He can't let that happen. That fumble, of course, going through the end zone was really bad a few weeks ago. Um, so yeah, I mean, you just can't make mistakes in a game like this. Top five games are always decided by who makes the least mistakes. That is the winning team, and that needs to be the case for Will Howard and Curtis Rourke on Saturday. I will say, obviously, Ohio State's skill position players are more talented. They're more talented in pretty much every game they play. And that'll need to hold true. These guys, Judkins and Henderson out of the backfield, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, et cetera, on the outside, need to make some plays for Ohio State. And Indiana just needs to play their game. They need to take it to Ohio State and be physical from the opening snap, which they will be. But they need to continue that the whole game. Hopefully capture some early momentum on their side with a quick score, maybe a quick stop, depending on who gets the ball first, and then go from there. So whoever makes the least amount of mistakes is going to win this game. That's usually how it goes in these big matchups.
Yeah, I think you're right, David, there. And the last thing that I want to discuss is going to be the defensive battle. Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun for Ohio State have been picked on by the talented wide receiver groups since Oregon exposed that. What do you expect from the back end of the Ohio State defense?
Well, I think Denzel Burke specifically has had a really rough go of it including and since the game against Oregon. He's been maligned by fans, and this is a guy who came back when a lot of people weren't expecting him to, and a guy who really needs to step up and be that senior leader on Saturday. And same with Davison Igbinosun, who's been really hot and cold. He kind of gives me Eli Apple vibes. If you remember those old Buckeye teams, 2014, Eli Apple, every once in a while, there's just a boneheaded play, boneheaded penalty, and then he comes back on the next play and makes a one-handed interception in the end zone. Iggy just needs to be a little more consistent. Try to avoid those big penalties. Just try. It probably won't happen. He'll get one. He always gets one. But try to avoid the big penalties, and certainly no busts and coverage. You can't allow those big plays down the field.
Yeah, I believe Davison Igbinosun is the most penalized corner in the country. But David, let's transition here. There's two games that are on upset alert. I think for me, it's a danger zone spot for Colorado at Kansas, a team that's surging with Jalen Daniels, and then Texas A&M at Auburn. That spread is only 2.5. So I say that to say, let's move into the Saturday 7 picks, get this slate here. We're going to start in the SEC. Ole Miss, 10.5-point favorites at Florida in Gainesville. This team with DJ Lagway is not what its record says that it is. This is a talented team. Can the Gators pull another upset and beat Ole Miss, or do the Rebels stay hot?
Yeah, I was in Gainesville, like I said, a few weeks ago for that game against Kentucky, and they just blew the doors off them. That was a really athletic team. They were flying around. I don't think they beat Ole Miss, but I think they keep it close and cover that. So I'm going to take Florida to cover, Ole Miss to win.
I'm staying. I'm going with Dave. I think Florida is a much better team than the 10.5 line it is for Ole Miss. I think they'll cover that, but I think Ole Miss will be, just a little too much at the end of the day for Florida.
I'm with you guys on that one. I think DJ Lagway and Florida keep it close. It's a night game. The Swamp is going to be raucous, so give me Florida to cover, but Ole Miss to win. We'll now go to a de facto play-in game for the Big 12 championship in Tempe. We've got BYU at Arizona State. Arizona State is actually favored in this game. The Sun Devils by 3. BYU coming off a loss to Kansas. David, how do you see this game going and factoring into the Big 12 and college football playoff race?
Yeah, I think this might be the first time we've ever picked Arizona State on the show. And my sister is actually a current Arizona State student about to graduate, so congratulations to her. And I'm going to pick Arizona State for that reason. They've been playing really good ball lately. Kenny Dillingham has figured it out in Tempe. For years, they've been called a sleeping giant, and it looks like the giant might be awoken. So I'm going to take Arizona State here.
Yeah, Dillingham has Arizona State rolling, and at first people weren't sure. It was a little rocky, but he has them with momentum that people haven't seen there in years, and I think they'll cover and beat BYU.
Yeah, Kenny Dillingham was someone I included on my Coach of the Year ballot just this week. I like Arizona State in this game. I think they're going to win, and I think they're going to cover. I think BYU is good, but the road is ended now for BYU. So give me Arizona State. Next, we'll go, staying in the Big 12, we'll go to Kansas. They are hosting Colorado. The Buffaloes just 2.5-point favorites. Again, same situation as as BYU, although this time Colorado's on the road. Tight spread. David, how do you see this game playing out?
Well, we said it was a fishy line last week, and yes, it was. Kansas got the job done, and I've got another fishy line this week. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to take Colorado, but the Vegas knows. They knew last week, and they know again. This game's going to be close. I'm taking Colorado, but I don't feel good about it.
Because Dave does not feel good about his pick, I'm going to take Kansas for the same reason because last time I picked against Kansas and I was confident about it, I got bit in the back there, so I'm going to go with Kansas here.
I will break the tie here and take Colorado. I think they are one of the hottest teams in the country. I think they continue their ascension. They will make the college football playoff. So give me the Buffaloes to win and cover. We will now come back to the Midwest here. Army at Notre Dame. This is a big spot for the Irish and the Black Knights. Could factor into the college football playoff race in the group of 5 team if Army could get the win. The Irish favored by 14.5 at home. David, who do you like?
I like Notre Dame. I like Notre Dame here. I think that's a good line. Army, obviously, with the ball control offense, there just won't be a ton of opportunities for scoring. I think it's right around that number, but I'm going to take Notre Dame. I guess I'll take them to cover, but I could see Army losing by 14 points or 13 points.
Yeah, Notre Dame, I think they're like the Notre Dame teams of past. I don't think they're going to be a high-end contender. They have beaten a lot of teams on their schedule that are, pretty bad. And they're, in a year where the ACC is down. So even those games aren't very great. But I do think they'll cover against Army. I think they're still rolling in this part of their schedule, and Notre Dame's going to cover that 14.5.
I'm a big believer in Marcus Freeman and what Notre Dame is doing this year. I'm going to take them to win and cover. I think they are more legit than they've been in recent years. But to the SEC here, Alabama 13.5-point favorites on the road in Norman against Oklahoma. Now, the Sooners, terrible offense, very good defense. This game is at night. David, do the Tide survive and keep the SEC championship hopes alive?
Yeah, I think they do. I'm not sold on Oklahoma. They haven't really beaten anybody. And Brent Venables, God bless him. He's going through, I guess his wife is having some health issues. So you hope that improves, but obviously that'll be on their mind this week. And for that reason, unfortunately, I'm going to be taking Alabama.
Yeah, I think that line is just low enough to where I could take Alabama too at 13.5. I think they're going to take care of business against Oklahoma. And obviously, all the best to Venables' wife. You don't want anything like that happening, especially mid-season. It could be a nightmare, but hopefully it's not.
Yeah, definitely extending prayers to the whole Venables family and the Oklahoma community there. I will, though, take Alabama to win this game and cover. We're pretty much the same here on these picks today. Not a lot of disparity. So give me the Tide to win and cover. I think they win the SEC. Texas A&M at Auburn. This is what I was saying, a danger spot. They've got Texas next week. This is a standard look-ahead spot. Who do you like?
This is a really tough one. This is a really tough one. I'm going to take Auburn here. I think Hugh Freeze kind of needs this one. I'm not sure, who's going to win this game. I'm going to take Auburn to cover it. I think Hugh Freeze needs it. That's really what it boils down to this week.
Yeah, I do think this is a game where Auburn typically wins, especially at home. Like you said, when Hugh Freeze needs a win, he usually tends to get it. I do think Texas A&M is a pretty good team. The line is very tough to pick, but I'm going to have to go with Auburn straight up to win and cover that 2.5.
Yeah, this feels like BYU Kansas to me. I'm going to take Auburn to win this game outright. Now, game of the week, Indiana at Ohio State. The Buckeyes favored by 12.5. Who do you like in this game? Does Ryan Day get a second top 5 win, or does Indiana continue its Cinderella run?
I think Ryan Day gets the win. I think Ohio State gets it done. I could see Indiana covering. I'm going to take them to cover. I could see this one being somewhere between 7 and 10, but I do think Ohio State wins at home, and I'm going to take the Buckeyes to win and Indiana to cover.
I think Ohio State is going to overwhelm Indiana and cover that 12.
I feel like this game is where the Ohio State defense comes in with an attitude and something to prove. All the other units have had something to prove this year, and they've risen to the occasion. It's the time for the Ohio State secondary to do just that. I think the Buckeyes win, and I think they cover at home. David, closing thoughts as we wind down the show here and get to this Week 13 slate, close to Thanksgiving.
Close to Thanksgiving. Everybody enjoy their holiday with the friends and or family. It's going to be a great couple of weeks of football. again, 100th episode. Appreciate you guys. It's been an awesome run so far, and I look forward to at least 100 more. So cheers, everybody, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah, right there with you. And guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review. It really helps out our show. And check us out on social media at Saturday Cadence for more content throughout the week. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. For David Wertheim and Grant Kincaid, I am Blake Biscardi. We will see you next time. God bless.